Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Don from 1A Auto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And the next time you need a part for your vehicle, think of 1AAuto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the front wheel hub on a 2007 Pontiac G6. It's fundamentally the same operation for a 2005 through 2010, and it is the same operation for left to right side. In order to do this procedure, you're going to need a jack and jack stands, 35, 19, 15, 14, 13 millimeter sockets, socket wrench and extension, a hammer, screwdriver, and a breaker bar with a pipe for extra leverage if you don't have air tools. Use a 19 millimeter socket by hand to remove the plastic lug nut covers. While I take those off.
Now remove the wheel and tire. If you don't have air tools, start with the wheel on the ground, loosen the lug nuts, then raise and secure the vehicle. Remove the wheel and tire. You want to remove the axle nut. I'm using an impact wrench, and what you can do is, if you don't have an impact wrench, have somebody hold the brakes and use a breaker bar and the 35 millimeter socket and probably even a pipe for extra leverage to loosen that up.
By hand, turn the hub assembly so that you can gain better access behind it. Use a 14 millimeter socket and socket wrench and remove the two bolts that hold the caliper to the caliper bracket. I'll fast forward through removing those two 14 millimeter bolts. Pull the caliper up and off of the caliper bracket and put it up and to the side. Take a screwdriver and pry the pad away from the rotor. Do that for both the inner and outer pad. Using a 15 millimeter socket and socket wrench, remove the two bolts that hold the caliper guide to the spindle assembly. I'm going to fast forward as I take out those two 15 millimeter bolts. Pull the caliper bracket up and out. Remove the brake rotor.
Make sure your axle is free from your hub. Put the hub nut on. Give it a couple of wraps. Watch closely the relationship of the axle to the hub, and you should see it move, and then you know it's free.
On the inside of the hub and spindle assembly, you're going to find three bolts. Locate those two, one on the top and then two on the bottom. Use a 13 millimeter socket wrench and extension if you need to, and remove the three bolts. And I'm going to fast forward as I remove the front and top one. Then go ahead and remove the one on the back side. Here I'm using a hammer where I'm going to tap at the back edge of the wheel hub. And once I've got that, I'll be able to pull it out. And make sure while you're doing that that you're maybe give it a little tap or two to the end of that of your axle so that that goes through, but be careful not to damage any of the threads on it. And then once you got that out, go ahead and pull it out and take off your backing plate.
Got the old part, new part from 1A Auto, and it's a direct replacement fit.
So you see we put the new hub in place with the backing plate behind it and started the bolts in by hand.
Now I'm going to finish tightening those bolts with my socket and socket wrench, and again I will go ahead and fast forward through that. Now you're going to want to reinstall the nut on the end of the axle, and I'm going to go ahead and use an air gun with this, and I'll fast forward. Our brakes were fine, so we're going to reinstall them, but if yours needed to be replaced, go ahead and put your new rotor on, and then you can use a lug nut to keep it pressed against the hub while you finish up the brake work. I'm going to reposition the wheel so that I can get that access to the back of it. Before I go ahead and put that caliper bracket back on, I want to make sure that the slides are well greased, so I'll pull them out with the boot. Check to make sure that there's grease on them. If there isn't, I will do that, and then go ahead and push that boot back onto the caliper bracket. And I'm going to do that for both of those just to make sure everything's good. Then I'm going to go ahead and put that caliper bracket back on with the 15mm bolts. I'm going to fast forward as I reinstall those two 15mm bolts. I'm going to torque the two 15mm bolts to approximately 65 foot-pounds. Take your pads and lube up with a little brake grease the ends that will get in contact with those caliper slide brackets, and then go ahead and slide them into place. Now go ahead and take your caliper and slide it over the brake pads and onto the caliper bracket, lining it up with the two slides, top and bottom. Reinstall the bolts that hold the caliper to the caliper bracket, and I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through that. Torque the two caliper bolts to roughly 35 foot-pounds.
Reinstall the wheel. Put the lug nuts on by hand first just to make sure you don't cross-thread them, then tighten them preliminarily.
I'm going to torque the 5 lug nuts to roughly 100 foot-pounds, and I'm going to do it in a star pattern.
Torque that axle nut, the 35mm axle nut, to 159 foot-pounds.
Now reinstall your hubcap, and I'm going to do that with that 19mm socket, and I'm just going to screw them in by hand. Also want to make sure that you line up the valve stem with the notch in the hubcap for the valve stem. And I'll go ahead and fast forward through that.
Last but not least, whenever you have your brakes apart, make sure you pump the pedal, make sure it's nice and firm before road testing. We hope this helps you out. Brought to you by www.oneauto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet. Please feel free to call us toll-free 888-844-3393. We're the company that's here for you on the internet and in person.